All right. Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and joining me today at long last is a man with whom I've had a number of contacts over the years. He's done some programming for me. I went through his A12 some years back with one of his coaches, John Scott Stevens, in Omaha, Nebraska. And this is the first time we've actually gotten a chance to talk on Zoom, or in any case, like in a back to forth thing that didn't require reading a message or listening to a voice message. So this is very exciting. So you folks are also on the bleeding edge of this interaction that we are having, and we're going to have a really good chat. We probably could have recorded and had a whole different episode, even just from the preliminary chat we had before we hit record. It's going to be very, very good. You know, one of the reasons that I wanted to have Paul on for this particular episode, most specifically, is he has got a spectacular new book out called Perpetual Strength. And if you are watching the YouTube video, you'll see me holding it, and you'll see his bicep pose there, just a casual, gunshot there. If you're listening, you'll have to take my word for it. But there's going to be a link in the description where you can go and read all about it. Very, very spectacular stuff. And we're also going to talk a little bit about his background, how he sort of fell into this approach that he has for strength and muscle building, which is truly, well, I'll let him describe it because if I try to do it, I don't think I could do it any justice. But we're going to eventually get to that. But we're also going to talk about the system that the book describes in great detail. You are not going to want to miss it. Speaking of missing things, if you have missed out up to this point on my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge, you're not a bad person. You could be better, however. So, if you go to 9minutechallenge.com, you can get your own free copy of that. It is designed to be done in conjunction with your regular training as opposed to instead of it. So, a lot of people I know like to either use it as a warm up or as, let's say, a finisher or on their in between days or maybe something to punish their kids with. I have no idea. But people really seem to enjoy it quite a bit. Super simple movements. You can learn them in 30 seconds or less, and they're based around the gait pattern. So it's literally what your body is designed to do. And I dare say that it would help probably complement a lot of your other strength training, including the stuff that we're going to be talking about on this episode. So again, 9minutechallenge.com, and it is yours. And that's the number 9minutechallenge.com. If you do type in NINE, by the way, it works because I was a guest on a podcast some years back, and the guy in the show notes wrote NINE minutechallenge.com. So I had to go out and buy it and then redirect it so it would go to the proper place. And several people this week have asked me about that. So I'm like, okay, I got to let them know. You'll still get to the right place, but make it easier on yourself. It's just one digit, 9minutechallenge.com. So without further ado, Paul, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Alex. Yes, we've had that problem as well well, it's not a problem with the Amazing 12, where we had to buy every conceivable. I
Yeah.
even have misspellings of the word 12, the 12 digits back to front, so 21, and just, but the website's Amazing 12, the digits, but it'll come up almost no matter what you type.
Yeah.
you know, you know,
You know,
Even unrelated stuff about cookery, it'll come up. Only joking,
well,
but you know what I mean.
you and I are unique also in the sense that I believe that the technical spelling of your name, I believe, is Pol, isn't that right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
that's the original Celtic Irish spelling of it,
Yeah.
but the rest of the world finds it weird and they pronounce it pole.
Well, look, my name is spelled Aleks, and I can't tell you how many
Yes.
times I've had to basically just be like, listen, I'm going to say the letter and something that, can, so like A as in apple, L as in
Yeah.
Lisa, and then I got to go through like the whole thing, and then I get to the K, and it's like you can see the trigonometry equation going on in their head.
Not Martin.
Yeah, math ain't mathin', and they're very quickly have a hard time. I used to do, this is kind of funny. Many years ago, I used to do karaoke at Buffalo Wild Wings, which
I can see
sounds,
that.
yeah, it sounds like a weird thing because like Buffalo, like I don't even know if that was anything other than like outside of 2 or 3 locations in Omaha, Nebraska, but it was like Thursday nights for some
Yeah.
reason they had Buffalo Wild Wings, but have karaoke. And there was one place that I went to where the DJ, if I did not write my name Alex in all capital letters, he just
Yeah.
like couldn't wrap his head around it. So it was like
Yeah.
I had to betray the
Yeah.
natural spelling of my name just to get it pronounced.
Yeah. I had a weird Buffalo Wild Wings experience myself one time. we were out there with Matt Hughes and Robbie Lawler watching the UFC.
Oh wow.
We were sitting at the table. That's when I was training with those guys. About 16, whoa, yeah, something like 16 years ago, 17 nearly. Um, and I predicted from watching, there'll be people who will know this who were at it. I predicted Rashad Evans knocking out Chuck Liddell that
Mm.
night. Nobody, even Matt Hughes, was like, "There's no way you're eating from the crazy bull." I'm
Yeah.
like, "No." I watched the clip of him training, and I could see that he was working on slipping to his own right and throwing an overhand right every time. Like it was the
Mm.
only thing he was doing in the clips, right? And then when he came out to fight, it's all he was looking for because Chuck kept throwing this big looping overhand right. That's what he was famous for.
Yeah.
And Rashad kept slipping and throwing his own, and he was missing by fractions. And I'm like, Chuck's not picking up on this. And I turned and said, uh, at some point here, Rashad Evans is going to catch him with an overhand right and knock him spark.
Yeah.
It happened, and the whole table looked at me like a piece of shit because they're all personal friends with Chuck Liddell. I was like, hey, don't shoot the messenger. It's not my fault. I
Yeah.
just seen it coming a mile away. Stevie Wonder seen it coming. It was like, it was just right there.
Yeah.
He was doing it over and over. And because of my background in boxing and martial arts, I just seen it. Because that was a boxing technique in particular, I could see it very, very clearly. It was
Yeah.
rudimentary stuff, to be honest, but
Yeah.
Chuck was missing it. For some reason, there's a certain hubris comes from just knocking everybody out back to back to back to back to back. Where you just
Yeah.
think I'm invincible. I don't care what he's doing. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. You don't
Yeah.
see it. So yeah, but there was people queuing up on one side to get autographs for Robbie Lawler, and I'm sitting eating Wild Wings.
Yeah, well, that's about all you can do when people are like lining up to like
Yeah,
hang out with legends like Robbie Lawler and Matt Hughes, and they're like they don't
yeah.
even care who's with them. They're like,
No,
if you were their
Matt and friends.
exactly Matt and Co. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Man, that guy, I remember it. I never watched as many Robbie Lawler fights, but I used to go. I remember seeing Matt fight, of course on TV and
yeah.
not in person, but he was like unstoppable for the
Oh,
longest time. And
yeah.
the other thing is that he just looked, he didn't really, I mean, it was clear that he trained, but you could also, even without, like if you were like, where do you think he grew up? You'd be like, well, definitely on a farm. Because
Oh,
he just looks like the quintessential farm kid.
100%. And it's funny you say you look at him and he trained, but it's natural. It's like there's some sort of laden, like long-term strength there.
Yeah.
His twin brother, I believe his name's Mark, came into the gym one day, and Mark doesn't train. He used to wrestle in high school, but to my knowledge, he doesn't train,
Yeah.
or he doesn't do much. Certainly doesn't do as much as Matt did. Obviously, Matt was a professional athlete. Um, he came into the gym one day and was standing at the reception area talking to the guy like he owned the place. Right?
Yeah.
I'd met Matt about 1,000 times at this point, and I walked up to him and started talking to him about training and about what he had said to me the last day in the gym, and he let me. He let me for like ages, and he was like, I'm not Matt, right? I'm like, what? It was at that point I found out he had a twin brother. I mean, identical. And his physique, is my point, was pretty decent.
Yeah.
And so it's just that sort of farmer lineage, it's just in him. Well, as soon as Hughes puts his hands on you, it feels different. It feels like a chimp or something has grabbed you.
Yeah.
It's that like there's weight training strength and there's grappler strength is different. One can increase the other. Like you'll probably increase grappling strength more effectively with weight training than you will weight training with grappling.
Yeah.
But there's a special kind of grappling strength that you can only get from grappling that needs to
Yeah.
go in conjunction with the weight training to enhance it. And
Yeah.
Matt had both. He was just a beast.
I wonder, it's interesting because as I recall, I think the old time strongmen believed that wrestling was essential if you wanted to not only get as strong as possible, but in their conception, also even for building muscle, it was very necessary. And it's funny to think now how over, I don't know, the last couple of decades, everything has gone from being somewhat integrated, where you used to have old schoolers like Armin Tanny, who was one of the Muscle Beach guys. He would do gymnastic stuff on his off days, just like for fun on the beach and what have you. And then he would lift weights as usual in the gym on the other days. And they would all grapple around and stuff like this. And now it's like so specialized that you've got people who are like, oh, I'm a barbell guy, or I'm a kettlebell guy, or I'm a wrestling guy, or a martial arts guy. But it used to be there was like enough of a mix of all of those things that we look back at how incredibly strong and fit these people were. And we're like, what were they doing? Like they must have just been built of different stuff back then. It's like, no, they were doing a lot of different things. They weren't limiting themselves to just one thing and then getting stuck at this peak for, years or longer.
Yeah, 100%. And I think they were uninhibited. They were blessed to be uninhibited by an oversaturation
Yeah.
of scientific knowledge on the subjects. Like sometimes ignorance is bliss. It's an old saying. We're talking about old things, so it's
Yeah.
appropriate. And it's true. Like most old sayings, they're based in truth, at least within the context of their time. But that one's timeless, and it's very very true. I said a number of years ago, I've kind of gone more down the absolute strength route in the last 5 or 6 years,
Hmm.
but I've been training consistently for over 30 years, and um, I've always kind of the ethos has always been I'd rather be 90% of everything rather than 100% of any one thing,
Yeah.
because that guy beats everybody
Oh
eight
yeah.
days a week unless you're doing something that's the super specialized area of expertise of one of those specialists.
Yeah.
And in that case, he can take his win and realize it's the only place he'll beat you. Like literally
Exactly.
the only place.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about not knowing any better. Like I just don't care. Sometimes when people say to me, you're training for this and you're training for that, you're training for like three things at once. Is that even possible? Well, it is if you get the mathematics right,
Yeah.
around the programming. And it also is if you disinhibit yourself, um, and believe that it's possible. Like there's a whole lot of it comes down to just not caring and
Yeah.
not so much of your energy goes on worrying about the crossing every T and dotting every I, and everybody's looking at watches to check is their heart rate a certain amount before they can touch a weight. And I just don't. If you feel it, you will feel it. you
Yeah.
know and it's not a case of if you feel it, it's already too late. you know, there's a million Olympians who would disagree with you. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And I'm not saying just because it's been done a certain way historically that there's not a better way and we shouldn't evolve as time goes on. But we don't fully understand the effect psychologically of constantly, meticulously monitoring every little detail of our physiology 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
And if there's a psychological impact on that, which I would say it's a reasonable estimation that there is, then it's, you know, a certainty that there's a physiological impact,
Yeah.
because your psychology comes from a physical organ, which is your brain,
Yeah.
right? These things are all connected. Your eyes are an extension of your brain. They are a part of your brain that has literally been with pressure pushed through your skull during formation in the gestation stage in the womb. Your
Mhm.
eyes are pushed through the holes in your skull, right? We are a series of geometric shapes slung together and work as a synergy in a conglomerate,
Yeah.
right? So there is no separation from the psychology and the physiology, really, right? It's a veil, right? We make up words to describe our reality, which is important. But at the same time, we have to understand the origin of these words. We like to segment things and put them into boxes. You know, this is a child and that's a teenager and this is a man. You're a human being the entire time, number one, right?
Mhm.
Life is a flow. It's a flow state. It's a synergy. And there is no separation from the psychology and the physiology. So I think over monitoring things is a mistake. And that was probably one of the big secrets of the old time strongman. How people like Saxon were able to do things that seem physiologically impossible for what was clearly a drug free man of normal size.
Yeah.
Because he didn't have a world telling him he couldn't do it. He was the first person who did do it. So there was nobody who said he couldn't. Why couldn't
Yeah.
he? You know?
Actually, it's an important point to make because I think one of the things that people underestimate the most is the importance of, people think like mindset is like woo-woo stuff, and it really isn't because a great example of I think probably the best example I can think of, and one that everybody can kind of connect with, is in 1954, Roger Bannister was the first man known to have run a mile
Yeah.
in just a shade under 4 minutes. It was like 3 minutes, 59 seconds, and something like that. Well, 3 years later, 16 other runners had done the same thing. So it wasn't that like our evolution just kind of got to the right spot. It was like people thought it can't be done. Why train for it? And then
Yeah.
when they saw that it could be done, they were like, why not me? And
Yeah.
so often people, if people have the why not me mentality as opposed to, how could I possibly do this or that or all of these things at the same time? Like the body is going to adapt. Like there are really only actions and consequences. And so
Yeah.
often people think, well, I mean, there must be only a certain, like a limited number of consequences that I could possibly hope for. And it's like, well, maybe, but why don't you just try it and see what happens? And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
missing.
I mean, 100%. Bannister's the most famous example, but human history is littered with it in
Yeah.
sport and all sorts of physical and even intellectual conquests, business conquests, you name it. Barriers are made to be broken. Eddie Hall with his 500 kilo deadlift.
Yeah.
I knew that would go and it would only be a matter of time. Even on a smaller level, like these are all the reasons why I knew something like the 40 kilo kettlebell press with no leg drive for 40 reps at 40 years old that I did in 2020.
Hmm.
I knew that would be possible simply because the Bannister attitude. Roger Bannister was a medical student in, I believe, Oxford, and he knew that there was no physiological reason why a man couldn't run sub 4 minutes for a mile.
Yeah.
Well, all he had to do was string together four back-to-back 60-second laps, and he trained for it in a super specific manner, a very what would be considered a very bizarre manner for breaking a 4 minute mile today. Today, milers do like a massive amount of weekly mileage, even though they only train to run 1 mile.
Yeah.
Massive amount by the everyday person standard, obviously small relative to runners who run longer distances, but
Yeah.
still quite a robust weekly mileage. And it's split up between all these different tempos of run. You've got tempo runs, there are certain heart rates and intensities and percentages of VO2 max. You've got intervals, you've got easy recovery runs, you've got everything in between, all sorts of track intervals. Bannister was like, no, I'm going to run. I'm going to run 60-second laps, and I'm going to take the recovery that makes it easy. You can see where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
right? And I'm going to add laps over time. I'm going to decrease recovery to a certain amount. It's going to be active recovery.
Yeah.
So over the long haul, all he did was interval track workouts at goal pace, which would be this similar to goal weight, which is
Hmm.
a lot of what I did for the 40 kilo press. A lot of work with the 40 kilo kettlebell at certain percentages of the goal number, which was 40 reps, continuous with one arm. Um, and he eventually built it up to the point, I believe, where he did 20 laps of the track at 60 seconds off of 60-second active recoveries. And the
Mm.
60-second active recoveries were half pace laps, right? So 8 minute mile pace, right?
Wow.
Just insane. So
Yeah.
40 laps of the track, right? And when he could do that, he was like, right. But the overall weekly mileage was minuscule.
Yeah.
And it was really minuscule for a very long time because that was the apex of the volume,
Yeah.
And he got his mates to pace him, who were also professional track athletes, milers, middle distance runners. One of them was an 800-meter runner, I believe, to pace him around Liffey Track. And that's when he broke it famously. And he broke it. People don't realize he actually battered his own time a few times again
Wow.
after that. The world record went back and forth, as you say, like a ping pong match
Yeah.
after he did it for the first time. So Roger Bannister taught us a lot about specificity,
Hmm.
taught us a lot about psychology, the importance of those two things, and taught us a lot about, believe it or not, what I would term comfort zone expansion
Hmm.
and, cutting out junk volume,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, tell us about comfort zone expansion because this is a sort of a thing that I think it inherently makes sense when you hear it, but similar to Bannister's approach being like, well, I'm going to do some weird stuff with my training because it makes more sense for what I'm attempting to do. so many people, I think, they show up and they're like, well, I'm going to do what, Guru A says or what Guru B says. And what they say might very well be true, but it may not be specific enough to what they're trying to accomplish. So how would you describe comfort zone expansion
Yeah.
for the audience?
Well, it's a programmatic ethos that is based around all the same. It manipulates all the same variables, all the same programmatic variables, things like volume, intensity,
Mhm.
density, even things like distribution. You can apply it to almost anything. And it is a form of strength cycling. It's a form of intensity cycling.
Hmm.
It's just its emphasis is different. So in order to get to that answer, I have to regress briefly, if you'll allow that.
Worse.
Um, to speak just briefly about where the progressively better ideas in strength training came from. So um, if you leave, it's interesting if you look at the so-called bronze era of bodybuilding and strength lifting, which we were just talking about, guys like
Hmm.
Saxon and all the old time guys who were all rounders. They trained in a manner that is probably more comparable to comfortable than what came shortly after them, right? It was largely down to one study, whose name I forget, that showed that training to muscular failure produced the most robust hypertrophic effect,
Hmm.
which is true, right? But it doesn't matter, right? So it's the eternal paradox of strength training and hypertrophy training in particular, that the very thing that produces the biggest hypertrophic effect in singularity is the worst possible strategy for long-term muscle growth,
Mm.
in my opinion, especially if you're drug-free and you're genetically typical and you're not maybe potentially in your prime age, but even for anyone, right? So training to failure is probably the least comfortable thing that you can do, discounting things like going beyond failure, training to concentric failure, then you could train the eccentric failure, then you could train the asymmetric failure, then you could train the forced asymmetric. I mean, you could take this to the point where you're almost, as Dave Whitley, right, the former master SFG and RKC once said to me, an A12 coach as well, um, if you take failure to its logical conclusion, it's death, right? If you go far enough, you're dead,
Yeah.
right? That is true. It's not necessarily a condemner of the system because dosage matters,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, you can take a medication and it can save your life. You take too much of it, it takes your life. So there's cause and effect and there's dosage.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, in the correct dosage, you can glean the benefits of failure without suffering the drawbacks. But I'll get to that down the lane if you want, if
Sure.
we have time. However, when you train to temporary muscular failure, it does produce this robust hypertrophic effect, particularly in beginners. But the length of time that you're going to be able to productively, linearly add weight to the bar and get stronger without a
Hmm.
better idea than just, I'm going to go in and try harder the next day, is short.
Yeah.
In a very generic, general sense, I'll put the term short on it,
Yeah.
right? How short is going to be directly dependent on a number of factors. It's going to be dependent on your gender, right? It's going to be dependent on your age, your chronological age. It's going to be dependent on your biological age, which is something that might be the same but can be different. It's going to be dependent on your training age. That's one of the biggest ones, probably the biggest one.
Hmm.
It's going to depend on the quality of your genetics for tolerating hard things and adapting to them and getting better.
Yeah.
And it's going to be dependent on your drug-free status or lack thereof in terms of performance-enhancing drugs, and probably psychological factors, stress factors, lifestyle factors. All these things play into how long you can stay productive training to failure in of any percentage of your training, let alone every set of every exercise, every workout,
Hmm.
right? But the problem is the vast majority of people think that is what you do, because it was largely a few preliminary studies, one in particular, that showed that on a very short term basis, training to failure produces this robust hypertrophic effect.
Hmm.
But like a lot of studies, it was conducted on untrained college age males, which is literally the most responsive physical cohort that you could possibly dream of,
Yeah.
really, right? And so and if you're gonna make it a 6 week study, well, that's just the honeymoon period of the newbie training phase. In
Yeah.
fact, that's not even scratching the surface. If you're young and you're male and you're motivated and you have low stress because you haven't got a job and you're partying with your friends, but you can eat whatever you want, and you're training and your body is a newbie, you can keep linear progress training to failure going for a while, right? But you're relative to your entire training life, it's a minuscule period.
Hmm.
It's statistically insignificant. I would go as far as to say that. I've been training for 30 years, right? And that point, even if you've got the best of genetics, is going to make up somewhere between 6 and 18 months.
Hmm.
Like at the best end of things. Most people could be done in a few months. It's like, whoa, I've now plateaued. What do
Hmm.
I do now? Well, the magazine says turn your baseball cap back to front and just keep trying harder. Candy us, you
Yeah.
know, not the way to go.
Yeah.
It's um, and it's equal parts confusing and bemusing to me when I see that the same individuals, almost always the same individuals who would scoff at the strategy of improving your one rep max by continually going to the gym every day and trying to lift heavier than your one rep max, are the same individuals who do the exact same thing with their 3 sets or 5 sets of 10 rep max,
Hmm.
right? Now, that's a lighter weight than your 10 RM, or you wouldn't be able to do 3 to 5 sets with it. And it's a much lighter weight than your 1 RM. But by the time you get to that last rep, it may as well be your 1 RM in large part, not quite. Okay, don't get pedantic, not quite, but in large part, like neurologically, it's close. Physiologically, it's probably worse because of
Mm.
all the fatigue metabolites and the myofibril breakdown and the potential, the catabolic element of doing high volume at very, very high levels of RPE is not insignificant. So this is like accepted as okay, but it would be ridiculous to say, well, I'm going to improve my one rep max by doing my one rep max again, only I'm going to add 5 pounds. No, 100% doesn't magically become less
Yeah.
unless you are a complete beginner. I mean, bronze, spanking shiny new, right? And even then, it's so finite, it's not even worth it, and it's dangerous no matter what,
Yeah.
right? So, and any rep maximum is going to get old real fast. And the destiny of that for pretty much everybody, in fact, absolutely everyone, is at least plateau, at least stagnation, if not eventually regression, burnout, illness, injury, you name it,
Mhm.
neurological burnout and physiological and psychological, see you later. And this is what leads to the most prolific condition in strength training today, which is the eternal intermediate. Just this eternal intermediate who, think about it. Anybody who's listening, right? What's your one rep max? You could be thinking about any lift. What's your 5 rep max? Maybe you never test your 1 rep max. Maybe you're smart, right? What's your 10 rep max? And whatever your favorite lifts are. And then ask yourself, how long has it been that? How long has it been that? Right? I
Yeah.
am absolutely willing to back the house, and it's a good house. I'm willing to back the house that it's been a long time. If you've been training for 10 plus years, it's probably been 70% of that for almost everyone. Do you know? That's the sad truth.
Yeah.
Do you know? It's like and people kind of, it's good to consistently do something because it's helping the healthier body to continue to train, it's helping the healthier mind. But if you're not improving, what people normally do is they do a training program that steers away almost from, you know, showing them if they've got better,
Yeah.
right? And then they change the training program and do something else, something kind of that kind of gives them a workout and doesn't ever like allow them to not so much test, but even experience if they're getting stronger,
Yeah.
know where their previous limits were and that they're going past them,
Yeah.
right? And that seems to be just the case. That's just the case,
Yeah.
you know? So obviously training to failure isn't a great idea. It's not a great programming strategy. There's also the physiological fact that the human body is capable of superhuman levels of force,
Hmm.
right? We are neurologically inhibited. Our central nervous system, even though us and it are synonymous and are the one thing, from a pragmatic point of view, from a utility point of view, it helps to think about them as two separate entities, you and it, right? It as a gatekeeper, almost as a doorman, right? That it is the entity that allows you extra force. It allows you access to the extra neurological force that you already are capable of,
Hmm.
right? Even when we're trying our hardest, the average person is only innervating something like 20 to 30% of the motor units available in
Yeah.
any one muscle group or any series of muscle groups in any movement pattern. And it's been shown that even elite weightlifters sometimes aren't able to get that beyond 50%.
Mm.
And the reason is a good one because when we're maximally innervated, we produce superhuman levels of force that could literally tear ourselves apart,
Hmm.
right? Bust ourselves in half. So that would really ruin your day.
Maybe a couple days.
You know what I mean? Might have to phone in sick that day.
Yeah.
But um, but what like dreams and wonders lie beyond? Even if we can teach ourselves, what the actual mechanical process is largely irrelevant. Whether or not we become more neurologically efficient, it's not fully understood how we
Hmm.
get stronger, by the way. We kind of know. And every time we think we kind of know, we find out something else, and then we kind of don't know. That's
Yeah.
just science, right? Which is okay, it's good. But it's important to understand that not every science is as hard as every other science.
Yeah.
And sports science is one of the softest that there is. And I'm a
Really
sports
squishy.
scientist and a strength and conditioning specialist, and I can say that with authority.
Hmm.
Um, it's not the same thing as rocket science, you know,
Yeah.
or any such thing, medical science even, which is fairly soft compared to other sciences as well. Sports science, if you think about, the type of money, everything costs money, and studies cost money, right? And it's hard for people to get funding to study cancer. So how much money is getting studied to just to discover the difference between sub-maximal and maximal training and
Yeah.
barbells versus kettlebells? Like, nobody is funding that, right? So you're going to get a quality of research that's comparable to the funding, comparable to the prolific nature of how many studies there are, the quality, all that. Okay, so we've
Yeah.
got to put that into context, right? So whether or not the process of getting stronger is we become more neurologically efficient and are thus therefore allowed to use a smaller percentage of the already predetermined 30 to 50%, or whether or not in some cases we're allowed to use a slightly higher percentage of what's there is largely irrelevant
Yeah.
because the end result in the gym is the only thing that really matters. And we're not trying to cure cancer here, right? So, pragmatically, what makes us stronger,
Hmm.
right? The nervous system is a gatekeeper of sorts. What his process is for allowing us to become stronger or for us becoming stronger is irrelevant. It's what is the conversation that facilitates that best. And when we look at that, we can see that on a base level, because we are neurologically inhibited by design, that on some level, the nervous system perceives excessive levels of force, read strength, as a threat, right? And then we couple that with the pragmatic, anecdotal, and also empirically measured evidence at this point, decades worth um, of individuals training to failure and it becoming very unproductive very quickly.
Hmm.
And I came to the conclusion a long time ago, based on those two things and other things, that on some level, oh, sorry, the third factor is when we look at what does constitute successful strength training historically, we see that weight cycling right, which is what is most prolifically used in strength athletes,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially a periodization macro cycle in microcosm, right?
Mm-hmm.
I.e., getting to the point, which is just strength, right? We see an increased time spent not training to failure, an increased time spent with reps in reserve, an increased time spent sub-maximal, an increased time spent training in comfort,
Mm-hmm.
relative comfort in comparison to failure, right? And when we look at the strength cycles that are most productive, the common denominator is that there seems to be a direct correlation between the amount of time spent training in relative comfort, i.e., with reps in reserve, and the ultimate productivity of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So when we couple that with what we know about the CNS and what we know about training to failure, the conclusion that I came to was train in comfort for as long as possible and manipulate the mathematic variables used for creating a progression pattern to be as least threatening as possible so that we can expand the
Yeah.
base, right? If we look at a strength cycle, the type of training that does work well, the type of training that powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters, and strongmen do, we see this wide base at the start, right? An inverse relationship between volume, a wide base of volume, with a lower level of intensity, and that those two things, go in the opposite directions
Mm-hmm.
until the cycle comes to its apex. And also, level of comfort is at its highest at the start and then decreases in direct proportion to the volume decreasing and the intensity increasing. Okay, this is not rocket science. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so strength cycling is like a pyramid, right? So, what I decided to do was build the eternal base because it's the most mathematically manipulable. That's even a word. If it's not, it should be, right?
It is
Malleable.
now.
Yeah. It's the one you can manipulate the best and the
Right.
easiest, right? And when you expand that, the wider the base of the pyramid, the higher the peak must get. So if I can increasingly lift, if I can manipulate the mathematics in such a way that allows me to lift heavier weights over time in the range that remains unthreatening, I will be able to proliferate or perpetualize the training cycle for as long as possible, make it as productive as possible. And as that comfort zone just expands and expands and expands, the goal is to eventually envelop the limit, right? And now where's your peak? Well, much higher, right? The wider the base gets, the higher the peak must get. It's
Mm-hmm.
literally a mathematical impossibility for it not to,
Yeah.
right? I can't significantly improve performance, i.e., decrease RPE, because that's what getting stronger really is. Right? I don't care what the mechanistic process is physiologically. I'm in my mid 40s and I haven't got time to worry about it. Right? There's
Yeah.
people who want to get stronger and bigger now, and all we need to know is the nuts and bolts of how it works, and leave it up to somebody else to worry about why it works. Okay,
Yeah.
and the wider that base gets, the higher the peak gets.
Yeah.
And we don't even have to go near the peak to be assured that it is raising, right? When the RPE lowers, the weight is lighter. You are
Mm-hmm.
stronger. It's as simple as that. If 70% no longer feels like 70%, right? Or if a certain amount of reps that used to feel like a 6 out of 10 now feels like a 4, or used to feel like an 8, now it feels like a 3. Even if you're subjectively not measuring that rate, it's definitely easier and you're definitely stronger.
Yeah.
you know so that's what strength is. We need to find a way to manipulate the maths in such a way that it lowers the RPE, that you can increase load without a proportionate increase in RPE,
Mm-hmm.
right? So every time you add load, there is going to be a bump in RPE, right? But it can't be in direct proportion to what the jump represents. So if
Yeah.
you go from, you need to know that by the time you jump from 60 to 65, that the 65, that 5% doesn't represent a 5% jump anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you're playing with the variables before you do that.
Yeah.
And then ideally you're making a grand gesture of peace to the central nervous system by decreasing something else or
Hmm.
maybe several somethings in a very specific way to allow and facilitate that load increase without a proportionate increase in the RPE,
Hmm.
i.e. the relative difficulty of the set. So these are the kind of ways we can, it's a strength cycle, just like strength cycling, but you're playing with the variables in a different way to emphasize a different stage of the cycle, which is the base,
Yeah.
rather than worrying about the peak. Because if you're not
Right.
a strength athlete, why are you peaking?
Yeah, this is the one thing that I was reading, I don't know, last couple of months about Dr. Michael Yesis, and one of his approaches for strength training for athletes was that a lot of the stuff at the time was very much focused around people who were strength athletes, writing strength programs for like track and field people and baseball players, and it's like they don't need 3 to 5 sets at like 85% max, because what ends up happening is that something that is good, again, it's a dosage thing, starts becoming something that's just draining them of what they need, which is to get better at their sport. So he was like, why approach training it in a manner that's going to require them to peak when like what they need to peak at and that they need to be really good at is something that is going to require strength, but it doesn't require that, you're trying to hit a 1 rep max or anything like that. And so I think, again, if you are following people who are strength athletics focused, they have a tendency to think like that, and it's harder for them to contextualize it for people who are training. We'll just say like strength training for fitness purposes or for their own individual needs. And so this is one of the things that I think is so cool about the comfort zone expansion thing is, like you said, you're constantly increasing the size of the base, the girth, we might say, of the base. And then as time goes on, the peak is there. You don't have to
Yep.
constantly like try to like wail and gnash your teeth to grasp onto it. It's already increased.
You touched on something beautiful there. um, and believe it or not, it applies even to strength athletes. So here goes. I mean, especially if the strength athlete can take a mature, long-term approach to it, which might involve potentially a year or more off competing.
Hmm.
And if my personal experience is anything to go by, a year in life, 5 years in life is nothing,
Yeah.
right? I've been getting stronger every single year for the past 32 years, right? And I'm continuing to get stronger naturally and with, fairly typical genetics deep into my wrong side of my 40s. And, you know, if you're not going to forget how to bench press, so from a skill perspective, it's there,
Yeah.
right? It's not like a big, for a strength athlete, it's almost easier. It's not like where you have to keep it really, really your game head really sharp. If you haven't been competing a lot and you're more nervous by the time you hit the platform because you haven't competed a lot, that's better because it's one effort and you've got an increased level of neural stimulation. If you're very experienced, you'll be able to control that and use it, to your advantage. So I'm of the opinion that strength athletes should compete way less than they do,
Hmm.
and that training for constant peaks lowers the peak anyway, even for them. But yes, if you're not a strength athlete, whether or not you're a recreational athlete or an athlete from a different sport or not an athlete at all and just want to get stronger, it's it's not the load on the bar that's the problem. It's the proximity to 1 rep maximum, i.e., on the RPE. That's the problem,
Hmm.
right? So those guys who, let's talk about that strength coach with those like track and field athletes or field invasion sports athletes like football players and whatever. Um, what's important is not to assume that they shouldn't be lifting heavy weights, right? The weights just shouldn't be heavy relative to what they could lift,
Hmm.
right? Here's the cool thing. Getting stronger can happen in any rep range and it can happen at any given percentage of 1 RM,
Hmm.
right? And if you can lower any given percentage of 1 RM, you will simultaneously lower every percentage of 1 RM up to and including 100%. It
Hmm.
is literally a mathematical impossibility not to. Yes, in the most immediate sense, you will have the biggest impact on the percentages that are maybe 10 to 20% north and south of the percentage range that you elicited the progress in,
Hmm.
but it will affect every range, including the 100%. So, in other words, if I'm training at 65% and I decimate what I'm doing in that range over the course of 6 months, and maybe I'm not even using that percentage all the time, but I lower what used to represent 65% to the point where it now represents 50%.
Hmm.
Really? Or it feels like it does. You're trying to tell me 100% isn't going to feel easier? You're going to rep it. You're not getting a lot of reps, but you'll probably get four. Do you know?
Yeah.
And you didn't even have to do it. In fact, the reason that you can do it is the exact reason why you shouldn't, because you already can. So
Hmm.
why take the chance of hurting yourself, especially if you're not a strength athlete, right? Performing a rep maximum isn't a builder of anything. It's a display of something,
Yeah.
right? You're displaying your ability. You're not building anything. So unless you're a strength athlete who's competing, you should really never do 1 RMs. You should really never do 5 RMs. You should never do anything RM, because every RM you do in training is a workout that's wasted several potentially because of the neurological recovery
Yeah.
ramifications that could have been used raising those limits.
Yeah.
Right? Every session you do finding a limit and displaying a limit is several sessions wasted that could have been used to raise it
Yeah.
by training sub maximally. Right? If you can get stronger, not going to failure, then what's the point in doing it? Especially if you're not a strength athlete, and even if you are, because the only point actually is progress. It's not perspiration or effort,
Yeah.
right? When you're on the platform, it doesn't matter who suffered the most. It
Yeah.
matters who lifts the most. So this is really like, so by whatever means gets you there, the easiest and the most profound is the one you do, right?
Yeah.
And if training to failure puts the brakes on that, and it's more dangerous, and you're not even a strength athlete, then what are you doing? You
Yeah.
should never be maxing out in any rep range, right? And you know, if what represents about a 7 out of 10 is now 40 or 50 pounds heavier, you're lifting a heavy weight, but
Hmm.
its relative danger hasn't went up that much because proximity to failure hasn't went up that much,
Yeah.
right? And percentage of 1 RM hasn't went up that much.
Mm.
If you'd have just added 50 pounds to the bar, it would have went through the roof. But you have expanded the comfort zone to the point where you now arrive at a point programmatically where it
Yeah.
represents way less than it used to,
Yeah.
right? So it's not that track guys don't need to lift heavy. They just don't need to be in close proximity to an any rep max.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah, and the that's the thing that I think is I'm fortunate that most of the people who follow me kind of instinctively understand that they don't have to go to the point where they're, you know,
Yeah.
biting
But they
chalk
should.
and
Yeah, sorry, just quickly. But they should be. Their training should be configured in such a way that it allows them to eventually lift way heavier than what would have represented that rep max.
yeah.
Right? It's not the weight that's the problem. Oh, a track guy doesn't need to lift all this extra weight. No, he does. That's the point of strength training.
Yeah.
It just can't represent a dangerous effort in terms of either fatigue or proximity of failure.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. No, it's like there was I remember reading I think it was Power to the People Professionals, one of Pavel's lesser known books, but it's very good.
One of
And
his
he
better ones.
Yeah, yeah, I really liked it. I remember one of the things that stood out in particular was he talked about how there was a Russian powerlifting coach who would have his lifters run maybe 2 to 3 days a week, and he said, the running was about as impressive to a runner as lifting would be to any of the lifters. But the point is
Yes.
that it gave them what they needed. And the approach was, of course, it's not like, oh, why can't this guy run 10 miles at a clip? It's like that might be a dangerous effort for him, might end up, giving him all sorts of, foot and knee issues. He needed to do it as much. It was going to help his lifting and his recovery and
Yes.
aerobic capacity. And so a lot of great coaches, this is the thing is that, you didn't just come up with this comfort zone expansion thing. We've talked about the old time strongmen kind of did it instinctively, even if they didn't have a name for it. A lot of other coaches understand this as well. I remember hearing that the difference between American wrestlers and Russian wrestlers, for instance, is that American wrestlers will go hard, take a day off, go hard, take a day off. But the Russian wrestlers are pretty much training daily, but at like 70%. So they're
Yeah,
pushing themselves, but they can recover. And then they end up, maybe a month before a competition, they'll kind of ramp things up a bit. But
yeah.
otherwise, they're getting in that sort of like comfort zone expansion naturally to the point where when they need to amp things up, they can do it. And so they get more training days in. So the same idea works with wrestling. It probably works with any other sport, and it sure works with strength training.
It works with everything, Alex. One of my big influences is a track coach called Clyde Hart.
Mm,
He was the track coach for Michael Johnson and Jeremy Warner, who were two of the fastest 400-meter runners of all time,
yeah.
200 meters in the case of Michael Johnson, even 100 meters in the case of Michael Johnson. Um, yeah, and Jeremy Warner, or sorry, Clyde Hart, the coach, was famous for having them run very easy.
Hmm.
They were fast by everybody else's standards, but slow by their standards, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
They would start off with a percentage of their max speed. It was kind of based around intensity cycling, really.
Hmm.
It shows you how this comfort zone expansion sort of ethos can be, and obviously he did it a bit differently than I did. But it's similar, and it was definitely one of the impetuses for me starting to think along these lines. Is that he would start off with a certain volume and a certain volume of maybe 200 to 300-meter repeats around a track at
Hmm.
a certain recovery rate in between, run at a certain percentage of their maximum of their best time,
Hmm.
right? And he would expand first the volume, right? And then he would decrease recovery. So he's expanding that,
Hmm.
even though it's contracting. You know what I mean? But you know what I'm saying? Um, and then before he increased the intensity, the actual speed of it, he decreased the volume again. He made a gesture. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And and he never at any point in training approached their limit times, right? It was all this sort of high volume sub maximal stuff that expanded, yes, in terms of what was asked of them, in terms of volume and intensity, but never to a point that would tripped the, what would you call it, the switch that triggered a threat response from the CNS. And
Yeah.
they subsequently went into competitions really well prepared, very confident, very fresh. And well, the results speak for themselves. They were the two fastest 400-meter runners of all time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just those guys. This guy, Clyde Hart, had phenomenal results with everybody. So there's something to look at, you know.
Absolutely. Now, I'm curious then, how when people think of comfort zone expansion in their own training, what are some of the differences programming wise? I mean, you discussed a little bit of it where it's kind of like you get the volume in and it's at a low enough level where it doesn't feel like it's a threat to the nervous system, and then you change another variable. I mean, that's somewhat, I think, well known to people. You start by manipulating one variable and then another one and then another one. But what are the main things that people should look out for if they want to try to take this approach of comfort zone expansion as opposed to trying to get outside their comfort zone as they've been taught for so long?
Yeah. Well, there's a fundamental problem with this, right? The book probably does the best job of giving you the rules, but it's still, I struggle to teach people how to actually do it, which is why there's so many programs that are
Yeah.
just made for people in the book to just use, because it's an art and a science,
Hmm.
but it's probably an art more than a science.
Yeah.
And if I'm honest with you, like, for example, when you came to me and said I have this amount of weight to press, I have this amount of time to do it, all I can tell you is I just seen the program instantly.
Yeah.
I just saw it in my head. Right? I'm a bit of a sort of an applied mathematics savant, right?
Mhm.
Um, there's applied mathematics, there's pure mathematics. I'm good at both, but I'm better at applied mathematics. And I apply it to the things that I'm interested in. Like I took a test. My wife took a test online. It's a famous one. I don't know what it's called. It's an aptitude test to test aptitude for computer programming,
Mm.
right? And she scored whatever she scored. And then she said, I want you to take this because you're like a robot. I just want to see out of curiosity. And it was, you had 25 questions and you had 25 minutes. And they're all mathematic questions. And I
Hmm.
got 24 to 25 in less than 25 minutes. Um, and I don't care anything about computer programming.
Yeah.
It couldn't bore me more, right? But strength programming sets me on fire. And for
Yeah.
some reason, you know, it's like the Will Hunting quote. When I look at a piano, I see some keys and a box of wood.
Yeah.
But when somebody else looks at it, they can just play it. When it comes to this type of stuff, I could just play immediately.
Yeah.
And if you give me a goal, I'll just know what the training program is.
Hmm.
I can tell you loosely, you should start lower than you think you should.
Yeah.
You should progress slower than you think you should. You should never try and progress all variables at once.
Hmm.
You should you should ideally, the main goal isn't the volume increase, even though that's probably what's going to facilitate the main goal.
Hmm.
Main goal is load increase.
Yeah.
Because whatever your goal is, if you're using resistance training to actualize it, it's going to have to manifest in an increased load.
Hmm.
That's as simple as that. You want more strength endurance, it's going to have to get heavier.
Yeah.
Trust me, it's not just about more reps, even for endurance, right? Because the relationship is clear, right?
Yeah.
Like, for example, in kettlebell sport lifting, you've got guys who can do X amount of reps, like a very high, over 100 with like 232s, sometimes over 150. I
Wow.
believe the world record is actually 180 or something like that in 10 minutes jerk with double 32s, right? But, what do you think the effect then has on double 20s or double 24s? Do you know? Or double
Yeah.
40s for that matter? It works in both directions,
Hmm.
right? But the main goal for anything resistance based is to ultimately to progress load. You want to get stronger. It's obvious you have to progress load. You want more endurance. If you're using resistance training, it's going to come most profoundly by increasing load within the volume ranges that are most conducive to endurance.
Hmm.
So rep ranges are largely BS.
Yeah.
Okay. You can't just do 5 reps and assume you're training for strength. You
Hmm.
might just be doing 5 reps, right? You can't do 10 reps and assume you're training for size. You might just be doing 10 reps. You can't do
Hmm.
50 reps and assume you're training for endurance.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're displaying your muscular endurance. You're
Yeah.
displaying your strength and you're displaying something in between, which is associated with size,
Yeah.
right? What you need to do is increase the amount of load that you're lifting within the volume parameters that are most closely associated with the goal.
Hmm.
So, whatever that goal is, if it says you're talking moderate to high total volume with a moderate to high-ish number of reps per set,
Yeah.
you need to increase how much load you're lifting within those volume parameters that are associated with hypertrophy.
Hmm.
And the more profoundly you can increase that load, the more profound the hypertrophic results are going to be, both
Certainly.
short, medium, and long term.
Yeah.
And the same goes true for pure strength. The same goes true for power, but then there has to be a rate of force production element added to it
Hmm.
as well. That you have to increase load without it falling below a certain rate of force production.
Yeah.
Right? Right?
Yeah.
And if you can do that most profoundly, you'll become more powerful. Right?
Absolutely.
It's just so load is the number one thing. But it's the thing you probably increase last if you're trying to expand the comfort zone,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's a subtle difference between regular intensity cycling and high intensity cycle for comfort zone expansion. You know, and when you do increase that load, it's important to make a grand gesture of some sort to the central nervous system, a grand gesture of trust,
Yeah.
and that's going to come from decreasing other variables. And how profoundly you want to make that gesture depends on how many things you increase, decrease, and what percentage you decrease it by.
Hmm.
And that should be directly proportional to what the increase was in load,
Sure.
right? There's sometimes I deadlift. I'm just going to tell you this briefly. A deadlift routine that worked very well for me recently was one that took 20 kilo jumps,
Hmm.
right? Now, that's not very incremental, is it? Right? But by the time I added that 20 kilo jump, I was doing an insane amount of volume.
Mm.
For a start, the load was already easy,
Yeah.
which is different, slightly different with comfort zone
Hmm.
expansion. It was already easy, and I just made it easier.
Yeah.
But it's far easier to make something easier than it is to make something difficult easier,
Yeah.
right? You're never going to lift a weight you can't lift by continually trying to lift it,
Right.
right? And shades of gray, every shade of gray decrease from not able to lift it is only a shade away from how profoundly hard it is to progress it. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So if you can lift something, but it's very difficult, then it's going to be still very difficult
Yeah.
to improve it. Do you understand? So,
Exactly.
you know, so I expanded it, from what was already easy. And then I was right, okay, now I'm going to make a load increase.
Hmm.
And I'm going to increase it by 20 kilos, which is 44.4 pounds, something like that. No, 44 pounds bang on. Yeah.
Yeah.
20.4 kilos is 45 pounds, which is usually American plate size, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then I dramatically cut back the volume to something ridiculously minuscule. And it was as easy as the last workout was, even though it was 20 kilos heavier.
So
And that
yeah.
allowed me to then increase it again and again and again and expand it again and again and again. So the art comes from what percentage you're using. The art comes from what rate you're progressing and what variables you're progressing and when. The art comes in how much load you add and to what lift
Hmm.
for what individual. And then the art comes from what gesture you make, how grand is it, and where do you expand from there. And
Hmm.
as you can tell from me explaining this, even though I'm telling you everything almost, I'm almost telling you nothing because that part of it is an art,
Yeah.
right? When you know the rules, here's the best way it was described to me. I had a Muay Thai teacher, right, who was a famous Muay Thai coach, Frankie McConville, in this country, trained multiple champions, an absolute legend. Trained Conor McGregor's coach, John Kavanagh,
Mm.
in Muay Thai when he was learning that way back when. Me too, in around the same time. Um, man, everybody who knew Muay Thai in this country came from Frankie, and he was an absolute sage, a genius, somewhat of this martial art. And he said something with me which resonated and is very appropriate when it comes to talking about how to learn programming or learn anything,
Hmm.
particularly comfort zone expansion. And that is Muay Thai, or in this case, we'll insert strength, comfort zone expansion programming, is like learning a musical instrument, right? Everybody, programming is like learning a musical instrument. Everybody knows the keys, right? You learn the basic keys and then you make the music up on your own,
Hmm.
right? And so the same keys that produce chopsticks can be used to extrapolate Beethoven,
Yeah.
right? Right? So you probably have to buy the book and judge for yourself whether it's chopsticks or Beethoven. But wherever you fall in between there, you definitely need to learn the rules, and it'll
Yeah.
teach you that, and it'll also give you programs that are hopefully better than chopsticks, right? To allow you to just get better, whether or not you have an ability to be Beethoven or Barbie girl, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But your ability to do that will manifest to whatever natural degree you have it, based
Hmm.
on what way your own brain is screwed in.
Yeah.
Once you've learned the keys, then you make up the music on your own. You know.
Incredible. Yeah, to me that makes good sense, and I think that talking about strength training being more of an art than a science, more people need to hear that because one of the things I see that drives me up the wall, and I'm sure you're the same way, is the science-based crowd.
Ah,
The thing is, it's like I don't blame them for wanting to try to use it, but and I don't think, of course, that it's useless. But the kind of the subtext that a lot of them come into their approach with is that the stuff that we know worked in the past, like, well, we don't have any scientific evidence about how it works or if it works. So we can only be viewed as maybe having been potentially beneficial to the individual, but not everybody. And it's like, I just don't think that's the case because, as you pointed out, there are so many variables. This is one of the reasons why sports science is a bit more of a soft science in the sense that there's the variable management that you have to consider, and even stuff like stress. You know, you mentioned Dave Whitley earlier. I did a great workshop that he ran back in August of 2023, where he talked about strength feats. It was like the old time strongman feats
Oh yes,
workshop, and he said, if you were to be on, you're about to get on stage, you're like feeling amazing. You're like, I'm going to hit PRs today and I'm going to make it look easy. And then you get a call from your wife and she says, your son fell down and he got hurt. He's okay, but he just wanted me to call you to let you know that he's okay. Subconsciously, that is going to have an impact, and it very well might have a very strong impact on your performance, even though nothing physiologically different happened to you between. It's not like you got hit by a car. It's not like a light fell and hit you on the head where there's now a physical change to the organism. And
yep,
the fact that I think there are other very smart people, like I had Berge Fagerli, who's a very well-known Norwegian hypertrophy specialist, said the same thing. He said, I think strength training is more of an art than a science. He's like, it's both, but
yes.
it's more of an art than a science because there are so many of those individual factors that a coach has to figure out what's going to work best for this person. Maybe they could go heavy, but psychologically, they're better off if they're going toward, for sets of 15 to 20 reps, and that gives them better results because they're going to be more consistent. They're not as
Yes.
freaked out about the weight, and they're still going to get stronger.
And the stronger they get within that range, every other range is going to get easier anyway.
Yeah.
I put my 15 RM up. I'm not going to not put my 1 RM up, right?
Yeah.
You're probably not going to be able to turn around, the next few days and do the very best you could at your 1 RM
Yeah.
by only training the 15 rep range because it's almost a different skill to handle a heavier weight.
Yeah.
But it's only a short peaking cycle away, right?
Hmm.
And you're trying to actualize strength that you've already facilitated, if that makes any
Yeah.
sense. You've facilitated it already, right? And your ability to instantly lift heavier for one is going to be directly proportional to how profound the progress was you were able to create in the higher reps. Like if I improve my 15 rep max by 5%, I might not immediately see that in my 1 rep max unless I peak it.
Yeah.
But it's only 4 weeks away,
Yeah.
maybe three, right? However, if I improve my 15 rep max by 20%, I'll instantly lift a heavier weight for my 1 rep max.
Yeah.
Instantly. And if I bother peaking it, it'll be higher than what I did instantly, right? So there's a few things you said there which were very interesting. First of all, with Dave, he's right. But I will say this, something physiologically did change when you were told about your son
Mm.
because your brain is your physiology
Yeah.
and your brain started dedicating more neurological, the synapses in your brain, the electrical power that powers your muscles,
Hmm.
right? When I'm going to lift or bend a bar, right? I have a background in steel bending as well, as you know, pretty extensive one. And you go to a different place when you do something like that. And your ability to do it is directly proportional to how completely you can go to that place.
Yeah.
And if we're going to break that down in a less woo way, what it is the synapses in your brain, hyper focusing
Hmm.
on this one task, i.e., there is literally more electrical energy being directly and hormonal response. Adrenaline, noradrenaline, testosterone, everything goes up, are being focused right towards this one task. Somebody tells you about your son, it's now, but depending on the individual and depending on the severity of the news, it could be 100% in another direction. Now all of a sudden you've got nothing to innovate with. And even if it's any percentage in the other direction, you've lost a bit.
Yeah.
And if that feat was near your limit to begin with, then you need 100%. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it can be either very important or not very important, depending on how difficult the thing is you're doing or
Hmm.
how big of a buffer zone of performance you have built around whatever this feat is. Like I could bend a 60D nail probably on my deathbed,
Hmm.
right? But I'm not going to, it'll take me to be on my very best day to put even the slightest bit of movement in a gold nail. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? and a red nail somewhere in between.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
100%.
um, the science-based thing is funny. It's a double-edged sword because I mean it lives and dies on the fact on one simple fact. This is not a realm that is pushed forward by sports science. This is a realm that is pushed forward by handed down wisdom from sages and mavericks that have come before that
Yeah.
sports science then studies to see is there anything legitimate in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially it, right?
Yeah.
This is the sports science, the direction of sports science studies is driven by the handed down wisdom, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And that's a fundamental difference between sports science and, let's say, engineering,
Hmm.
you know, where it's 100% driven. It's a harder science,
Yeah.
right? This is way fluffier, just right out the gate. So that like sort of respect and bowing down. I'm a qualified sports scientist. I am a sports scientist, right? And I'm a strength and conditioning specialist, which I went on to do after
Hmm.
that. And I can tell you right here and now, I've actually been a part of studies that done things and looked at things. And, you know, when you've been to the puppet show and you've seen the strings, not only do you have the innate sort of intellectual, um, theoretical view of what the limitations would be, you've got a 3D, 4D image of how bad it can get, how good it can get, and how bad it can get.
Hmm.
So not all studies are created equally either. And you
Yeah.
can't just look at stuff. It's all fluffy. And some of it is positively, you know, fluffy beyond Fluffville. It's the
Yeah.
mirror of Fluffville,
Yeah.
And it's like, but people who don't know better are looking at the same stuff with the same level of validity. And
Yeah.
it not always is.
Yeah.
And like I seen something recently where um an influencer who is known for a sports science perspective was recommending, did a tiered list, I believe, on bicep exercises. And I think he had a thing called a bison curl at the very top. Like this is the apex of curls, right?
Hmm.
I know we're talking about something that's like the broiest of bro muscles, but bear with me,
Yeah.
right? Might not be exactly your audience who are like hardcore kettlebell guys and deadlifters and stuff, but we're going to talk about biceps because
Yes.
it's coming up to Christmas, and who doesn't want bigger biceps for Christmas? I know I do. I mean, welcome to the gun show.
Yeah,
You seen
exactly. Of
you seen the cover of the book? Um,
course.
so yeah, a Bayesian curl is essentially a curl that biases, although that's just a coincidence that it rhymes. Or a Bayesian curl. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I don't really care either.
Yeah.
Um, it biases the resistance under load in a stretch position, right? Because recent studies have shown, and probably not without merit, recent studies have shown that if hypertrophy is the goal, that full range of motion reps are probably still king,
Hmm.
but that the portion of a full range of motion rep that's potentially the most hypertrophic is when the muscle is loaded under the stretch position. Okay,
Hmm.
when it's stretched under load, i.e., at the bottom of a repetition. So for a bicep curl, that would be at the when the arm's fully extended. But the problem with training biceps is it's very, creating DOMs in a muscle group is also directly proportional to how much you can stretch the muscle group under load. So there's definitely something to loaded stretching. And by the way, this is not new,
Yeah.
right? This is not new at all. Loaded passive stretches were being done in the 80s and the early 90s. I remember reading about it, right?
Hmm.
Then they spoke about stretching the myofascia to leave more room for the muscle to grow, which wasn't exactly what was happening, but they had still observed and rightly observed that loaded stretches produced a more hypertrophic effect, right? And also professional bodybuilders like Ronnie Coleman and stuff 20 years ago spent a period of time on certain sets emphasizing the lower portion of the rep, which is essentially, you ever see it? You ever see Ronnie lift? Where
Hmm.
sometimes he's not fully locking out, but he's always biasing his full stretch at the bottom
Yeah.
because he noticed that there was a continuous tension in his mind. A continuous tension created a greater hypertrophic effect from the muscle. You're
Mm.
not moving it, you're not balancing it on your structure. It's always on the muscle.
Yeah.
right? And that is one of the reasons. But another one of the reasons was probably because it was bias in the loaded stretch position, right?
Hmm.
So these ideas are standing on the shoulders of ideas that are already there,
Yeah.
which is my exact point about sports science not driving strength and hypertrophy advances, but rather observing them and then studying them,
Yeah.
right? It's almost like sports science comes later and has a look at stuff that, sage wisdom has already long since established as effective,
Yeah.
right? So the biceps is hard to make sore because it doesn't stretch very well because the elbow joint stops there,
Yeah.
right? The triceps are easier, the pecs are easier, right? Like when's the last time you had properly sore rear delts? It's just hard to put them under loaded stretch,
Yeah.
right? So a basin, I think it's pronounced curl, does a better job of that because your arms are behind your body and
Hmm.
potentially higher, like this.
Yeah.
And there's a cable that's coming up this way and it's
Mm.
stretching the muscle, right? And he was like hailing this exercise as the king of all bicep exercises. But, you know, again, producing a large amount of hypertrophic stimulus in a single workout by either bias in the loaded stretch or going to failure isn't automatically the main driver of ultimate hypertrophy,
Yeah.
right? If you're going to failure, you're going to fail eventually. Your nervous system's going to shut you down. You're going to lose your ability to lift heavier and heavier loads.
Hmm.
And heavier loads within the volume parameters that are most closely associated with the goal is the number one driver of consistent progress of that goal.
Hmm.
You want to get bigger most profoundly and for the longest period of time, get stronger for reps.
Hmm.
And that's going to be not achieved by going to failure. We've
Yeah.
established that, right? So, you know, the same thing with loaded stretch. It's not the number one thing to look out for. The programmability of the exercise is how, how much can it answer that key question? What's the exercise that I'm going to be able to get stronger on fastest for the longest period of time relative to the muscle group and motor pattern that I'm targeting, right? Within the volume ranges that are associated with hypertrophy.
Yeah.
You're talking about some sort of strict curl with a barbell, straight bar, or an easy bar, potentially a preacher curl, whatever has the highest poundage potential
Hmm.
for that muscle group, right? And is the most incremental.
Hmm.
And if you've got a barbell, has the highest poundage potential for a bicep exercise, usually the highest poundage potential no matter what muscle group or
Hmm.
movement pattern we're talking about,
Yeah.
right? Um, and it's also most incremental and therefore most programmable because the weight jumps that you can make are smaller. You've got a
Mhm.
weight stack that's maybe going up in 10 or 20 pound jumps, and it's on a very load limiting exercise anyway, because your arms are stretched way back here, and it's like ultimate isolation of the single joint. And
Yeah.
it's like you're not going to be able to get stronger for reps on that exercise as quickly or as profoundly as an easy bar or straight bar, standing strict barbell curl, full range of motion, or a
Hmm.
preacher curl, something like that, right?
Yeah.
Preacher curl, by the way, does a very good job of emphasizing the loaded stretch anyway,
Yeah.
right? So no, take your wee fancy curl, and it's a decent exercise. I'm not saying throw it off the table. Maybe use it as a finisher, but that's the dessert. That's
Yeah.
not the main course, right? The rising tide raises all ships. Do you know the
Hmm.
best way to improve your bassin curl and bias that loaded stretch at the bottom with progressively more relevant loads? Get stronger at the barbell curl,
Yeah.
and it will push that shit up while you're doing the two of them.
Yeah.
Try that, maybe.
Yeah.
You know, and science didn't need to tell me that because programming did. You
Yeah.
know, it's the same with failure. Did you like the odyssey of lifter A versus lifter B
Of
in the
course.
book?
Yeah.
You know, do you mind if I touch on it very briefly because I think it's important?
Please do. Yeah. It was a very, very
Right.
good example.
Sorry for going off on a tangent, but I just want to nail this one because it's related to that one. So, well, there's many different examples of lifter A, lifter B, so I'll give you the cliffs notes for the listeners and watchers, viewers. Um, Two genetic clones, lifter A, lifter B, lifestyle clones, training experience clones, everything's the same, dietary clones. The only thing that's going to be different is what they do with their training over the
Hmm.
next number of weeks. They use a 10 rep max, which is if you're of typical fiber type, fast or slow twitch fiber ratio distribution, it's probably going to be 75% 1 RM in most cases,
Hmm.
right? A bit less if you're very fast twitch, a bit more if you're very slow twitch, but generally probably about 75% 1 RM. That's a 10 rep max. Lifter A is going to do 3 sets to failure, right?
Hmm.
He's not going to get 3 sets of 10. Otherwise, it would be his 3 sets of 10 RM and not his 10 RM.
Yeah,
It wouldn't be
exactly.
75%, it would probably be 70, right? To do that. And even that would necessitate reasonable rest periods. So it's probably at the best going to look something like 8, 10, 7,
Hmm.
I believe is the example I give in the book,
Yeah.
right? So that's 25 reps in total, right? And that's on a good day. Because if that's your rep maximum, it's not always your rep maximum is a movable feast.
Yeah.
It depends, like Dave Whitley said, on what you were told in work that day and what happened here and what your sleep was like and blah blah. When you're training so close to the edge, everything affects the last rep.
Hmm.
Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Oh yeah.
Everything affects the last rep, you know? So your 10 rep maximum isn't always going to be the same. But
Yeah.
let's just assume that we're in a fantasy land and it is. And this is his good day. We'll give him all the advantages. That's the best as he can do. 25 reps. So we're going to get lifter B, and he's going to do 20 sets of three with it.
Hmm.
Something totally different. Why can he do 20 sets? Because only 3 reps, right? Because the RPE is literally a 3 out of 10 on the first set.
Hmm.
And this isn't a magical configuration. It can be anything, right? This isn't even one of the programs discussed in the book. It's just used as an example, right?
Yeah.
Um, So even by the 20th set, it's maybe a 5 out of 10,
Hmm.
assuming reasonable rest periods. And you're not just trying to go non-stop without any rest.
Yeah.
And even if you did that, it's probably not going to be a 10 out of 10 by the time you get to 20, right? Every single set that lifter A did was 10 out of 10 because he went to failure. It can't be anything less. Just because
Hmm.
he's getting less reps than 10 doesn't mean to say it wasn't a 10 out of 10 effort. Okay? Those two things are different,
Yeah.
right? So who has more of a chance of progressing the load on the bar, which we've established is the main driver of progress, assuming that you're operating within the volume range that's associated with the goal, which
Yeah.
in this case is strength and size. It's got to be B, right?
Hmm.
Because, the guy who's perceived every set as 10 out of 10, or the guy who's perceived his sets as fluctuating between a 3 and a 5 out of 10.
Hmm.
Like, I mean, he can do whatever he wants. He
Yeah.
doesn't he doesn't only have to he can't only he's not only in a position to increase it slightly, he can increase it dramatically if he wanted to, but he's not that stupid,
Yeah.
right? He's going to increase it a bit. And over time, he eventually gets to 20 sets of six, right? Right out the gates at 20 sets of three, he's doing 2.4 times the volume. That's
Hmm.
60 reps versus 25.
Right.
He doubles that to 4.8 when he gets to 20 sets of six.
Hmm.
It's maybe still only an 8 out of 10 RPE on 20 at the sixth rep of the 20th set, right?
Yeah.
Right? But is he bigger than this guy? Almost certainly. He's doing 4.8 times the volume with the same load.
Yeah.
And it's probably not taking that much longer, even though it's 20 sets versus three, because it's sub maximal, so he doesn't have to rest as long.
Yeah.
Right? It is going to be longer at that point, but not massively, right?
Hmm.
And even if it is, it's still going to be done quite quickly relative to 20 sets.
Right.
But guess what he can do now that he has earned a load jump? That's what he has earned.
Yeah.
But he increases it by the smallest amount he can increase it by. If he's using a barbell, let's say, or anything, and he makes a grand gesture of trust to the central nervous system, what that could be anything. He could keep the same number of reps, decrease it to 10 sets, half the set, 50% set reduction.
Hmm.
He could keep the same number of sets, bring the reps rate back down to 3. He could do both those things. He could do none of them. He could do something different, start decreasing some of them over time. However comfortable or aggressive he wants to make it, the world is his oyster. He
Yeah.
can add load. What's his potential from getting from 20 sets of 3 with an extra £5 back up to 20 sets of 6? It's 100%. It's 100% certain, unless he gets hit by a bus, right? Now he's slowly but surely. We revisit this guy 6 months from now.
Yeah.
He's got an extra £20 on the thing, and he's still doing 20 sets of six.
Yeah.
Is he bigger? You betcha. Is he stronger? You betcha. Here's the kicker. Not one of his sets produced as much individual growth stimulus as any one of lifter A's sets.
Yeah.
Think about the ramifications of that. Let that sink in, right? Every single one of lifter A's sets produced more growth stimulus than any single one of lifter B's sets.
Hmm.
Yet lifter B is way bigger and way stronger now than lifter A.
Yeah.
And it's not in spite of that, it's because of it. He is bigger and stronger because not one of his sets produced as much growth stimulus as not one of lifter A's sets.
Yeah.
That is a paradigm shift. And that is a mathematical fact. That's a mathematical fact. That guy is bigger. He is stronger. He did it easier. He perceived it as easier. He had more fun doing it.
Yeah. And he can
And
think more.
yet not one of his sets was produced as much growth stimulus as the first guy.
Yeah.
Right? So, that might be something that's worthy of scientific research. But I don't really
Certainly.
have time to do it because I already know it's right.
Yeah.
That's not hubris, right? If it was wrong, I'm good at knowing when I'm wrong,
Yeah.
right? And it's not like these ideas just spontaneously sprung out of my brain, right?
Yeah.
It's been a 30-year process of standing on the shoulders of giants, of being influenced by other ideas, of extrapolating some things and looking at them and going, okay, this is why that's happening and that's why this is happening. I've arrived at this point, right?
Hmm.
And it's also not something that's dramatically different than strength. It's just a different form of strength cycling.
Yeah.
It's not this big, maverick thing. But it's a totally different perspective, right? And I just, yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's a really incredible paradigm shift. And the other thing that again, it also is eminently sensical because it's like think about I don't think I've ever met a mail carrier who does not have like absolute like watermelon sized calves.
yeah.
They're not uh, they're not
That's
like
true. Actually, I never thought about that, but you're right.
think about it. I remember when I lived in Pennsylvania, there was this guy who, I mean, I would see him traipsing through the neighborhood almost daily. And it was like, I mean, I want to be like, I want to know your calf program, but realistically, I don't because it's just you walk around eight
You know
hours
his
a
calf
day.
program already. Didn't need to ask him. Yeah.
Exactly. And he's not doing something like two sets to failure every single day. It's a lot of low intensity. Well, I mean, if you look at the reverse of it. So the guy's calves are great because he's constantly putting them under use. Same thing with mechanics, they're not doing crazy stuff to try to grow their forearms, but their forearms get bigger because they're constantly twisting and
True.
tweaking and what have you. Even
And
even if
his
bad
calves,
posture.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was
Sorry.
going to say, even bad posture. You think about people with, this sort of hunched over posture from sitting all day. They didn't
Yeah.
put like 100 kilos on their back and they're like, okay, 3 sets of 5. I'm just going to hang out in this position for 30 seconds. They're just constantly in this position. And so the body adapts.
Yes. Yes. 100%. And those calves and those forearms and those workers would be even bigger if they found a way to increase the amount of load of the mailbagger
Yeah.
that they were carrying over time without increasing the relative RPE of what it took them to do the same mileage, you
Yeah.
know, and they'd have to do less doors, but eventually, you understand?
Yeah.
So that's an example of how repeated submaximal contractions can still get great results, but repeated submaximal contractions that also involve progressive overload is just boom, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what we're talking about when we're talking about that's the crucial difference with comfort zone expansion rather than just staying in a comfort zone. What you've actually pointed out there is cool. That what that shows is actually how much progress you can make without even leaving a comfort zone,
Yeah.
without even expanding it,
Yeah.
staying in it. You know, what they probably did was they entered at a level that wasn't quite comfortable, expanded their comfort zone up to a certain point, and then
Hmm.
maintained it. Because that's what a job is.
Yeah.
You come in, you're sore for a period of time because, like I had to chop down 3 trees, or sorry, chop up 3 trees the other day. We had a storm here,
Hmm.
and 3 of the trees in my property got uprooted and smashed. And I forego I forgo the temptation to get power tools, and with an axe, essentially, I just had this epiphany. I was like, oh, it doesn't really matter if they look pretty. They'll still burn the same way if we dry them out, and
Hmm.
it'll be way more fun to chop it up with an axe. So I chopped up three full trees into 12-inch segments with an axe. So think about how many strikes that was.
Yeah.
Just to get through each one of those, to create each one of those sections with those three trees, full size trees. Um, and the next day there was DOMs.
To say the
But,
least.
you know, but it's funny enough, the weight training has really stood by me because it wasn't as extensive as I thought it would be,
Sure.
but it shows you all the muscle groups. That was one of the things Arnold Schwarzenegger used to do. If he wanted talk about not needing to wait on sports science, right?
Yeah.
The Austrian oak used to do 20 sets of 20 reps of just one exercise and then locate the exact part of the muscle group that it targeted most. So if you're doing an exercise, the all or nothing rule applies. The
Yeah.
whole muscle will contract. There's
Hmm.
no such thing as a purely upper chest or mid chest or lower chest exercise. However, and I'll argue this all day long with the sports science crew, of which I am a reluctant member. Right? I strayed both worlds like Blade from the movie, like
Yeah.
Daywalker. I'm over here and I'm over there in the lifters crew as well. But
Yeah.
honestly, it's better over on the lifters side. But yeah, you definitely can bias like a higher percentage of the work towards a different segment of a muscle.
Hmm.
Right? The way Arnold intuitively found out which part that was by doing a random insane amount on just one exercise, and the next day observing where the DOMs was most intense,
Yeah.
and then he had his answer.
Yeah.
Oh, my upper chest definitely feels sorer than the lower or the mid, so that's a mostly upper chest exercise, and it hits it around here and this and that.
Hmm.
So just intuitively, very highly intellectual approach to it, without having to wait on the study says, you know, so no
The
thanks.
complete dweebs. Well, that's the thing is like again, I think it sports science is valuable, but
Oh, it is.
whenever you hear like, well, according to a recent study, like, did you even read the study? Who is the cohort? Like there's a guy, I'm not going to mention his name because I don't remember how to pronounce it, but he's known to talk about like these studies. I don't know if he's done them or he's just publicizing them, but he's well known. He's got a PhD, so he's not a dummy. But there was one in particular. There's a gentleman I follow who's like the anti-sports science guy, and he's genius. And he was like, look at he's because he knows how to read the scientific studies. He goes like, look at the cohort. It's 70-year-old like untrained women, and he's saying that you can stay 8 reps away from failure, and it's the identical hypertrophy response, or it was something similar to this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it was like
It just didn't line up. It just wasn't widely applicable to the vast majority of people who were going to extrapolate all sorts of stuff from it.
exactly, yeah. And I know
Yeah,
that and I think it was Charles Poliquin who pointed out that the best in the world today are doing the stuff that in 20 to 30 years sports scientists are going to be studying. So
it's
look at what
true.
they're doing and try to extrapolate those lessons from what the best are currently doing, as opposed to waiting for the science to catch up.
That's the truth. And in almost no other area of science does the actual practice proceed, right? The
Yeah.
scientific study of it. So that sort of tells you how soft sports science is. And don't get me wrong, it has improved a lot, and there are some things that we do know way better. And it's not like, you need to keep an open mind. It's not like I look at a recent result and go, that's just some pencil neck who can't bench press 200 pounds.
Yeah.
He may well have the answer, but I don't just automatically assume he does. I
Hmm.
investigate it, I interrogate it, I take it for what it is, and it almost always has some merit,
Yeah.
right? But you need to put the merit in context, and almost no one either bothers to or has the training to. That's
Hmm.
not their fault. I
Yeah.
don't know how to. I don't understand loads of different fields of expertise because I'm hyper focused on my own. So that's the same thing with most people who strength train. They're doing it
Totally.
for either aesthetic or health or functional benefits, performance benefits, depending on the cohort.
Hmm.
Maybe all of the above, please.
Sure.
Which is probably most people. Um, and they don't necessarily have a sports science background and can separate the wheat from the chaff. But hopefully, podcasts like this might go a ways to showing them to
Yeah.
be slightly more critical.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anything, whenever I write an email or an article or, have a video on, at a wide variety of topics, I'm more likely, if I'm going to refer to anything, I'm more likely to look at what worked when things didn't work as well, meaning there was not this abundance of knowledge, life was not as easy. This is one of the
Yeah,
reasons I really like the old time strongman, is because if you broke your arm or whatever, like Conor McGregor when he broke his leg fighting Dustin Poirier, it's like,
yeah,
now it's not necessarily the end of the career. I mean, it's usually a pretty severe dent, like it was for Anderson
yeah,
Silva and Chris Weidman and stuff like that. But
yes,
but there are things that can be done that can help you to at least, extend your career potentially. But if you did that like on stage, you were trying to bench press and it didn't work and you snapped one of your ligaments or your tendons, it's like your career was over and the rest of your life was going to be punctuated by pain. And then that was probably going to have a lot of other ramifications because that was your only profession. Now you can't do it. So if it worked under the worst circumstances, at a minimum, it should probably work pretty well under the cushy circumstances that we're fortunate to live in now. And that's one of the things I find to be much more compelling than a recent study says.
remember I told you not that long ago, a few minutes ago, that certain pieces of information that managed to befall my ears provided an impetus for another thought that took it to another place.
Yeah.
Well, you just did it live.
Nice.
So here's what I think about that. Having heard what you just said, I think you've stumbled on the gold. Honestly, I think that's the reason why they were so strong.
Hmm.
Bear with me. Maybe they didn't understand why this was working, but because they had to perform frequently, right, and they couldn't get hurt, the necessity of the reality of the medical science or lack thereof world that they were living in at that time necessitated that they took a conservative approach to getting stronger.
Hmm.
And as a direct result of that, they incidentally, potentially unwittingly, largely, stumbled across the best way to get stronger.
Yeah.
And why do I say it's the best way when a lot of those guys were smaller and in some ways weaker than the biggest guys today? Because if you take away the steroids, you take away the access to modern foods in the quantities that we have them. Like 100 years ago, people didn't have the money to eat that much.
Yeah.
The general food quality of the good food that was around was probably better in a lot of places years ago because it didn't have a bunch of chemical shit in it. But
Yeah.
in terms of total calories, that just didn't the capacity to do that just wasn't there
Yeah.
unless you were really rich, which none of these guys were, apart from maybe Sando in the end. But even that was probably relatively fleeting. But you know, they were as strong as they were with no steroids
Yeah.
and hard lives and almost no food.
Yeah.
And if you took away the steroids, the performance enhancing drugs, see all this 20% shit, right?
Yeah.
I've seen some people do some stuff where they have literally doubled their strength when they went on anabolic steroids.
Hmm.
After like a couple of years, they're literally, and they were already well developed, and they're literally lifting double the weight. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a hard and fast rule. You know, it's more like I would say 60% for some people,
Yeah.
right? Which if you're already lifting quite a bit of weight, that's a lot. If you add 60% or even 40% to the old time strongman lifts, they're up to and beyond the best strongman of today.
Yeah.
Beyond. There's some things that they did back then that still haven't been broken,
Yeah.
right? You know, like Steinborn's
The
Steinborn
Steinborn
squat
squad. Yeah.
record only fell a few years ago to Martin Licis, who's the world's strongest man at a
Yeah.
CrossFit event, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? That was a 250 kilo squat where you stand the bar on its end, grab the bottom of it, grab the top of it, slowly inch it to your shoulders as you're squatting with it, rock over and stand up with it.
Yeah.
250 kilos, 550 pounds, right? And Lacey's
Unreal.
broke that, and it wasn't that easy for him. And he's enormous and chemically enhanced.
Yeah.
Sanborn was half his body weight and drug free.
Yeah.
So I think I might want to know what way he was training.
Exactly.
Saxon put 170 kilos over his head with one arm, right? Now, he essentially moved himself. Anybody that understands a band press, for those who don't, it's not really a press, it's a bit of a misnomer. It's a yield.
Yeah.
You're moving away from the weight until your arm is locked out and then you're standing up, but still,
Yeah.
that is that is a superhuman feat of whole body strength.
Yeah.
No one has even remotely come close to doing that. You might say, okay, nobody's been trying, or modern strongmen don't have the shoulder mobility to get into the. Fair enough, that's legitimate. But look at the Maxic was pressing like 230, 240 pounds over his head, strict with his heels together, double-handed military press,
Yeah.
145 pounds body weight, almost no food, ripped to the bone, right? Drug free. It was over 100 years ago.
Yeah. And even crazier, most of the stuff that Maxick did was just muscle control. That was like his.
Oh, that was insane. That stuff he could do with his abdominals and
He could, for the people who are listening, if you look this up, I mean, I don't know how many pictures you'll find. You'll find pictures of people doing it. I don't know if there are any of Maxick doing it, but he could he could do the stomach vacuum where you pull your stomach in, and then he could voluntarily move the muscles over to one side. So he was contracting only one side of his abs, which is almost impossible to do. I mean, you can be learned, but you rarely see anybody do. The only people I see do it now, they've got their hands braced on their thighs, and they kind of use some body movement to get it
yeah,
done. And maybe Maxick did the same thing, but the fact that he was able to lift weights that were world class at that time, where he grew this is another thing that I think is incredible about him is he was extremely sick as a child, made some dumbbells for himself, and his dad smashed them. He was like, no, you're not gonna, take the risk of the doctor said you can't lift or exert yourself. So when everybody went to bed, he just started to tense his muscles in different ways and stuff like that. And before you knew it, he was out lifting everybody at like the local gym. It's
it's
just
insane.
mind blowing.
And talk about he was a very sickly child, and his name was literally Maximilian Sick,
Yeah.
and his stage name became Maxic, one word. And that 231, 235 pound, 100% strict military press is still world class,
Yeah.
pound for pound. Like if you take the Olympic press, the layback press out of it, and you bring the feet together like that, with the turned out but the heels together,
Hmm.
and you get a 145 pound guy, that's still world class,
Yeah.
and it's drug free.
Yeah.
You chemically enhanced him. You can add an enormous amount of weight to that, right?
100%.
So whatever way he was training, whatever way all those guys were training, the takeaway point is was very effective. And what way they did train was well within their capability.
Yeah,
They expanded the comfort zone essentially.
exactly.
It was forced upon them through the necessity of the lifestyle, the world that they lived in. They couldn't afford to get hurt. If they got hurt, they didn't get paid. If they didn't get paid, they didn't get eat.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And there was no way to fix you if you got badly hurt. So it was all conservative and
Yeah.
progressed, you know, conservatively as well.
And people, just so that people know, people did get hurt. There were, of course, sometimes there might be someone who'll be like, you know what? Those strongmen were lifting
Yep.
fake weights
Keep
and stuff
talking.
like
Keep
that. Yeah,
talking.
yeah. They were lifting fake weights and they were, it was all BS. But no, a lot of it was verifiably true. And people did get seriously hurt. There was a story about a guy, the Mighty Atom used to have these feats with his teeth where he would bite down on something and prevent a truck from doing it. There was one guy who tried to replicate it and lost all of his teeth. So, I mean, granted, I guess he still had the rest of his body that he could do feats with, but people got
Yeah.
hurt all the time. This was a serious business.
The super athletes.
Oh, Dave Willoughby?
Yeah.
Incredible.
This book is, I think, was first published um about 100 years ago, and then this edition was potentially the 60s. And this is a book that people should look out for if you're interested in the old time strongman,
Incredible.
the super athletes. There's pictures of Mexic in here and all those guys. And it's just insane what some of their strength lifts were.
Yeah, the sort of a thing that you're not likely to see anybody doing nowadays, not for lack of ability necessarily, but for a change in our approach to training that has more driven by records and less by the methods of the old timers. Like I'm reminded of, I think it was Pyotr Krylov who said that the system being used by the young ones today. This was already like in the 1800s, where it was all records driven is a very wrong system because it just burns the athlete out. He said, I'm 42 now, and my muscular size and quality is no different than when I was a 25-year-old Girovic. And he lived to be, first of all, 60, which in that time period was still notable.
Yeah, might as
And
well have been 90.
yeah, well, and particularly because he lived in Russia, which was like basically a death sentence, like for any
Yeah.
otherwise young, healthy individual. And if I'm not mistaken, in self-imposed exile in Siberia because Rasputin tried to kill him, and he had to stay one step ahead. So the dude was a hardy, hardy mofo.
Anybody who can live 60 days in like 19th century or Siberia, never mind 60 years, is a hard nut.
Yeah. He was harder than coffin nails. I mean, obviously, eventually the Grim Reaper came to take him, but I'm sure he probably pinned him at least twice in that wrestling match.
Yeah, I mean, that is quite prophetic and something that I can relate to directly. Do you know, I've been training for, well, let's put it this way. We mentioned it earlier, an overemphasis on records, he said, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So what that also, the modern application of that, I think, is looking at is becoming mentally and emotionally obsessed with these biometric readings from all these bio watches and this and that.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of them. I listen, there's nobody who enjoys numbers and data more than me,
Yeah.
right? In fact, that's one of the reasons why I don't get them, because I know that in about 3 months I'll be naked in a room and there'll only be equations on the wall, and my beard will be down around my kneecaps, and I'll just be talking about the monkeys and they're coming to get me. Like
Yeah.
if I focus on numbers, if I had that much access to that much data, my brain would just go off on 1,000 tangents and pull it apart and start delving deeper. And you know, I know a guy who's not quite the way I think, but he's along those lines, and he got one of these watches, and it's destroyed his training.
I'm sure.
Destroyed his training. He literally is afraid to put a foot wrong unless the watch tells him he can lift something. And I'm like, man, you were doing fine before you got that watch. Now you're going downhill. Do you not see the correlation?
Yeah.
So I can relate to what that Gervik was saying. And also the thing about getting better as you get older. If you're training naturally, and especially if you're training, I would say with a comfort zone expansion based approach to programming. Well, if you think about it just objectively, if I divorce myself from the bias that I have towards my own system,
Hmm.
or it's an ethos really, it's not really a system. Once you learn it, you'll be able to comfort zone expand program in the
Certainly.
way that you want to do it. Do you know what I mean? It's a
Yeah.
martial art almost of programming. You
Yeah.
know, there are moves, but I don't own the evolutions that you're going to be able to do. An arm bar is an arm bar, but there's people who grapple in different ways, and it will evolve. And that's what I hope for this as well. And I hope that people extrapolate my ideas and take them to a place I couldn't. But um, if you think about it objectively and divorce yourself from the bias, if it's possible, don't know if it is. Um, you know, what is the a less injurious approach to programming? One that has you closer to a limit and has less reps in reserve, or one that has you further away? I
Hmm.
mean, it's potentially safer, right? So for the long term, and if it perpetuates progress in a more consistent and profound way, then getting older doesn't mean the same thing.
Yeah,
It just means a longer opportunity to get stronger.
exactly.
Like if you could stay 20 for 40 years, how strong would you be? Right? Well, I'm here to tell you, I don't think that people are getting older in a manner that would be counterproductive to getting athletically stronger. I think it's the modern world, lifestyle choices, changes in jobs, you know, hormonal impacts of having children, and then still trying to train in a suboptimal way for long periods of time that lead to stagnation and then regression when it comes to middle-aged strength performance.
Yeah.
Bear with me, think about it, right? They say, oh, if you're still training the same way you did when you were 20, when you're 40, then you're an idiot. And you're gonna, there's gonna be profound ramifications. Yes, true. If the way you were training in your 20s was suboptimal to begin with.
Yeah.
That's key because suboptimal is always suboptimal, right? And let's say you didn't age any more than when you were 25. You were
Hmm.
eternally 25, but you still had extra miles on your 25-year-old physical clock by doing something that was suboptimal for a longer and longer and longer period of time. You're going to get increasingly more bashed up and less able to do it,
Yeah.
even if you didn't get older, because there's just been more time doing the bad thing or the suboptimal thing. You
Absolutely.
know, a 25-year-old gets punched in the head once, has a certain amount of brain damage. You can stay 25 and still get killed by getting continually punched in the head.
Yeah.
You didn't die because you got older. You were older by the time you died, right? It might have
Yeah.
been 10 minutes older, but you were older by the time you died, but that wasn't the cause of death.
Yep.
That's like saying the cause of death is because you were older on the 1000th punch.
Yeah.
No, no, the cause of death was punches,
Yeah.
right? So you're weaker in your 40s, not necessarily, I believe, not necessarily because you're older, right? Or you're sore and bashed up in your 40s, not necessarily because you're older. It's because you've been getting punched longer
Yeah.
by a suboptimal form of training,
Hmm.
right? You might have the. Can I tell you something?
Yeah.
I got stronger faster after the age of 40.
I believe it.
My strength started to accelerate because my metabolism or whatever it is slowed down a bit. I was permanently ripped. Permanently. I couldn't get rid of my six pack from my childhood right through to my late 30s. I
Yeah.
couldn't get rid of my six pack. No matter what I ate, no matter how much cardio I didn't do, I was ripped. Low single digit body fat for most of
Mm.
that time period. And then when I hit 40, it became a lot easier to do two things: get bigger and stronger in an absolute sense, and also gain fat. So I had to watch one side of things. But at the other side of the equation, it was way easier. You know,
Yeah.
like when I was in my 20s, I've been trying to become the strongest person that I could be for 32 years.
Right.
So if there was a peak to be had in my 20s, I'd have found it. I'm still getting stronger
Yeah.
and I'm in my mid 40s, right? So it's not necessarily, yes, when you get to a certain point, I don't know what it is, and I don't know that any of us do. When you get to a certain point, you will physiologically decline, and it'll be sort of fighting the down of the light, so to speak.
Hmm.
But at what point does the light shine brightest? Because for me, it's not 25, and I was
Right.
trying my hardest. For me, it wasn't 30. I was trying my hardest. It wasn't 21, right? It's not 45. I'm still getting stronger, right?
Yeah.
I can't wait the next year because I'm going to break more PRs. The comfort zone is going to expand more and more. So, getting older is not a death sentence. You can destroy yourself over time with suboptimal actions. And I'm not even entirely sure, what the impact of aging is up until early middle age
Yeah.
on strength performance. And there's a lot of athletes that kind of, like George Foreman was better in his career as a 40 in his 40s than he was in his 20s.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that the 40-year-old George Foreman would have beaten the 20-year-old one.
Yeah.
No doubt in my mind.
It all, yeah.
Bernard Hopkins got better until he was nearly 50, right? And
Yeah.
that's not just strength. That's a sport where you're beating people up.
Yeah.
If anything's going to age you, it's that. And the sports did. Here's the best part about that: the sports did age them. It's a physical impossibility for to get hit in the head for that length of time and have it not.
Yeah.
And they were still getting better in spite of that. How good would they have been if they'd have had their 45, 50-year-old body who'd had all that extra years of training and their 20-year-old brain that hadn't been punched a lot yet? So think about that in terms of strength and sports performance where you're not getting hit in the head.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be getting worse as we get older. We should be getting better because we've
Yeah.
had longer to train. If we're not, there's something wrong with the training, not our bodies.
Exactly. Very well said. We could go on, and Lord only knows, I would love
But
to.
Christmas is coming, so we're
Exactly. We got to make sure that the trees are up, the presents are wrapped, that Santa is
yeah,
well fed. And
yeah.
speaking of stocking stuffers, oh, we got Perpetual Strength. I've got my
Oh,
copy. And I think the only thing that would make it more valuable would be in person, a signature one of these
we
fine
gotta do it.
days. We'll make it
We will
happen.
do it.
But in the absence of that, at a minimum, I think that people should get this book. And where can people pick up a copy of this book?
So there's two places you can get it. You can get it from the famous, the infamous, the legendary, the iconic dragondoor.com, the place that published all the bestsellers of Pavel, Don John, Marty Gallagher, Paul Wade, all the legends that
Yeah.
you and I came up on. Don John writes the foreword of this book, which was a hell of a moment. You
Oh
know, I
yeah.
I contributed about half a dozen pages to Easy Strength, his co-authorship with Pavel, who's also still a good friend of mine, Pavel. Maybe, well, how long was that? 14, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And, to have him contribute, to have it to be Dragon Door, it was important to me.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the first one, at least, is Dragon Door. And to have Dan John write that forward means a lot. So you can get it on dragondoor.com. You can get it in ebook format, which is obviously less cost and more immediate. But I
Mhm.
personally like paperback. There's something tactile about a real book. You can get it in paperback on Dragon Door. Also on Amazon, you can get it on Kindle and you can get it in paperback on Amazon as well. You just
Amazing.
search the title and you'll get it.
Excellent, folks. I highly recommend that you get it. If you love geeking out about strength, I mean, and frankly, look, if you're listening to this program, you definitely do.
Yeah.
You owe it to yourself to get perpetual strengths. You can get perpetually strong, and that extra number being added to your age at the end of your next cycle around the sun is only a signal that you're getting stronger, you're getting fitter, and you're going to give your kids or even your grandkids even more of a run for their money. So
Yes.
maybe keep the book for yourself for now, but at some point when you want a little bit extra
Pass it
competition,
on.
exactly, pass it on, get a couple of extra copies. So, Paul, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
And folks, as always, have fun and happy training.